morning, everyone. My name is Mark Borchwell. Today I'm going to give you a brief history on genetically modified organisms, also known as GMOs. The title of this speech is going to be called a Franken-friend or Franken-foe. What exactly are GMOs? Now, when we hear words like genetically modified, we get varying pictures in our head. But would you believe me if I told you that there's a little difference between that cauliflower that was put together several hundred years ago in Italy by cross-pollinating two plants versus the tomato that was created in a lab called the flavor saver? Well, biologically, the processes are very, very similar. We're going to go into how genetically modifying plants in a lab is not necessarily a fundamental shift in what humans have been doing. According to Fred Kaufman, a writer for Popular Science, who did an article called The Second Green Revolution, he visited two genetic scientists, and he started off his paper by mentioning that humans have been selectively breeding plants for at least 10,000 some years. Humans would crossbreed for the plumpest grains, the plants that would have the highest yields, plants that would be the most effective at surviving the elements, be it frost, floods, or whatever. But what really kicked this off was in 1886, a monk named Gregor Mendel, who could be arguably viewed as the father of modern genetics, discovered what was called the factors of inheritance. What he did was he took together 30,000 different pea plants, and he just made different charts expressing different types of genes, what we commonly refer to as dominant and recessive, meaning traits that have a stronger chance of being passed on than other genes. And if you've had a basic science course in high school, you may remember being taught this. Luther Burbank is a more modern geneticist in late 1800s, about 1893. He was coined the seer of plants. He was famous for his pitless prune, his spineless cactus, and his white blackberry. Now, this isn't to say there are no inherent risks associated with genetically modified organisms. The framework for copyrighting intellectual rights was pioneered in the 1930s, but for the most part, the Food and Drug Administration has had a stance that basically genetically modified foods are held to pose no safety concerns because many of the food crops currently being developed with splicing techniques do not contain substances that are significantly different from substances already in our diet. However, there are several cases of prominence in the recent decades, such as the flavor saver, which was a tomato that was supposed to have longer shelf life, that turned out to be a commercial flop. In fact, it helped spark the anti-GMO movement, in part because they brought to light different crops such as potato with a chicken gene, tobacco with a firefly gene, tomato with an Arctic flounder gene, which Greenpeace personally took offense to. Anton Wohlers, the Associate Professor of Political Science and Academic Research at the University of Cameron, also has a lot of good points. He brings up that the overall perspective that Americans have towards genetically modified organisms is relatively positive, and this can be traced back to the FDA's regulatory capacity to ensure that only the most proper things are introduced into our diet. And but like I said, in recent years we've had situations with the flavor saver. Another situation that occurred was with different types of corn containing genes that were specifically meant for the consumption of pigs, cross-pollinating in human corn that was marked for human consumption. And around I believe it was 1996, 1997, between the late 90s and early 2000s, there was cross-pollination that occurred. And the FDA tested and found part of this GMO, genetically modified corn, in human taco shells. And so again, that created an uproar. But one of the problems that you run into with publicity like that is that it tends to overshadow the potential good benefits. For instance, golden rice that was created in 1999, and what it is it's special rice that has vitamin A infused in it. And according to the World Health Organization, approximately 200 million children have a diet that's deficient in vitamin A. And vitamin A is very important in maintaining sight and vision. And of these 200 million children, approximately 220,000 to 500,000 per year go blind. Now, because of the ferocious opposition towards this golden rice, it hasn't yet to be distributed among the people who arguably need it the most. Now, with this being said, we can see that cross-pollination, if you're not familiar with it, I've said it a couple times, but let me elaborate. It's when pollen from one plant and pollen from another plant interact, and it's like the fertilization process of a plant. And once this occurs, the plant can then produce offspring. And this occurs in nature, but it also can occur with genetically modified crops, with, say, for instance, crops that are earmarked specifically for organic. And this can pose a lot of problems because the specific crops, like I mentioned earlier, could be earmarked specifically for animal consumption. And conclusively speaking, the fundamental processes that occur in the lab and in nature are essentially the same. And there's scientifically, there's little to no difference in GMOs now. The only thing that changed is the means of producing GMOs. No longer is it a guessing game of taking one plant A, plant B, cross-pollinating it, and hoping you get the desired traits in plant C. It's more of a harnessed approach that can occur in a lab. Now, whether or not policy drives something one way or another is beyond the scope of this, but fundamentally, these are essentially the same processes. Thank you.